When you buy a Mini-Phalaenopsis, there are a lot of myths that come with that. Hi, I'm Amanda Matthews, and if you're new to my channel, I share tips on how to grow orchids indoors since my conditions outside are not that favorable for orchids. One question I get asked a lot is if mini orchids are going to stay. And the first one is that this is a baby orchid and it is going to grow into a huge orchid, and it's going to just take up a whole bunch of space because after all, everything that is cute like puppies and kittens do grow up and get sometimes humongous. Mini-Phalaenopsis are already adult orchids when you buy them. They will grow around 6 to 10 inches tall. Another myth that I came across a lot was this orchid treated chemically to stay small, and once you rinse this orchid off like the product on its leaves, that these components will be flushed off and then this orchid will grow into a humongous orchid. That also is not true. There are 3 reasons that a person will buy a Mini-Phalaenopsis. And the first, of course, is the size. Sometimes we get tricked into thinking that a small version is easy. Let's buy the mini version. It must be easier than keeping a huge orchid alive. Any mistake you make on a smaller version, the orchid will react quicker. So if you are underwatering with a small teacup orchid, or as they're sometimes called, they will dehydrate faster than if you have a huge pot. So any mistake that you make with a mini orchid can be more critical than an orchid that is in a huge pot. Before I go on to the next tip, if you are liking this video, please give it a like. Comment down below what your questions are about Mini-Phalaenopsis. The second reason of why people will buy Phalaenopsis orchid, Mini-Phalaenopsis orchid, is of course the price. Now the price on a Mini-Phalaenopsis can go anywhere from $8 to $16, citing prices around the United States, which I've researched. A bigger orchid can start at around $30 if you get it on sale, and it usually runs around $40 to $50. So there is a huge price influence in this decision, and that is why most people will buy the Mini-Phalaenopsis in the first place. And the third reason is this orchid usually comes in these cute little teacups or pots that are more decorative, and that is a huge problem because if you're not used to orchids and you see this beautiful little orchid in a teacup, your first reaction will, hey, the orchid's gonna die. When it dies, I use the teacup. Well, the teacup is already going to cut off the air circulation. It's not going to allow light to penetrate through that, and there are no drainage holes. You have to get the Mini-Phalaenopsis out of that cute little teacup. You have to place it in a different potting media. The main difference between a Mini-Phalaenopsis and a huge Phalaenopsis is the potting media. When you buy this Mini-Phalaenopsis, it will be usually in either 2 things. The first is a peat moss type plug that is going to look kind of like a brownie that will crumble in your hands, or it's going to be pure sphagnum moss. Now, in a nursery where you have thousands of orchids in a row and you have a sprinkler system and you can keep that sprinkler system on during a good part of the day, you will have the perfect environment for sphagnum moss and peat moss. The majority of these teacups will come with a tag saying you can water with ice cubes. Please do not do that because orchids do not like cold water or hot water either. You need to keep that water very lukewarm at a temperature that would simulate the temperature in a rainforest. So slightly to the warmer than to the cooler, but never ice cubes. If you're just starting out, I do not recommend planting an orchid in pure sphagnum moss because it does take a little learning curve. Once you get your watering right, once you get your fertilizing schedule right, once you know how long the pot will dry out, then you can use sphagnum moss and it is perfect for that. But as a beginner grower, you're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to trade out this pot that is pure sphagnum moss, and if you want to keep it in pure sphagnum moss, that's okay, as long as you have a pot that is very well ventilated. A bigger orchid will be potted in more items such as perlite, charcoal, sphagnum moss, of course, orchid bark, and tens of other thousands of things that we can get creative and mount them on. When you get this home from the store, the Mini-Phalaenopsis will not be planted in these things, will not be potted in these things. Whatever you do, do not repot this in soil, as in the potting soil you would use with your garden or any other houseplant for that matter. If you want to know how to choose your potting media, you can watch this video up here, which I will tell you what's the best media for this orchid. But right off the bat, if you don't want to go over there right now, I will tell you it is a mixture of sphagnum moss and orchid bark. Put those together, make sure it drains well. Now, I am not going to lie and say that your Mini-Phalaenopsis will not grow at all. Remember, this is probably the first time this orchid has ever bloomed, and it's already on the market. So next year it will grow about an inch or two. Now, watering and fertilizing will influence the size of this orchid. When I give an answer and say your orchid will not grow at all, well, of course it won't grow into a huge orchid, but it will grow 1 or 2 inches. And what influences this is the water, is the light, is the humidity. All these things will come in contact and influence. If you have a good environment for this orchid to grow, yes, it will grow. It won't keep growing at this rate of 1 to 2 inches per year. It's going to stop after it gets a certain time. And then each year the leaves are going to grow to the same size. So you're not going to have one short leaf, then one long leaf, then one short leaf. They're all going to grow the same size. Another difference between a Mini-Phalaenopsis and a huge potted Phalaenopsis is the kind of pot you will repot it in. As a normal rule, we always repot in a pot that is about 2 inches larger than the previous year. That's because the roots are growing on this Phalaenopsis, and they will need a pot that is bigger next year. Mini-Phalaenopsis, well, they won't. When it comes to repot this orchid, and you will need to repot it about every 2 years, in my experience, I've never been able to do that. I've always repotted at a year, so I keep trading out this, and that's probably because I used a terrible quality sphagnum moss. So check out your sphagnum moss, get a good quality. You can see that video up here. You're going to get sphagnum moss, you're going to get orchid bark, you're going to mix that together, you're going to repot this orchid, and you can repot it in the same pot that it's in. Those roots are not going to grow enough to justify a bigger pot. Information is extremely important. So if you want to keep this Mini-Phalaenopsis alive for years and years to come, keep watching videos, keep searching information, but don't ever stop being curious. Always learn more, because that's how you're going to keep your orchid alive. But I do want to suggest 2 videos, and those are the ones that I cited in this video. And the first one talks about potting media, and the second one down here talks about sphagnum moss. So in these 2 videos, you'll know how to repot your orchid when that time comes. Thank you so much for watching, and happy cultivating.